So good morning, everyone. My name is Celine Kyra. I'm an economist at the OECD, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to the fourth day of the Symposium on Industry, Science, and Society. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing our exceptional keynote speaker this morning, Nicolas Miailhe, also affectionately known to some of us in the AI community as Nico. Nico is a recognized pioneer in the field of AI governance, ethics, and institutional innovation. For the last 15 years, he has helped to shape AI governance frameworks globally, including in Europe, the US, India, and Africa. Now, I have personally seen Nico in action at the OECD and our network of experts, really working to elevate the voice of civil society on key AI governance issues. And what some might not know is that in 2014, he actually left a career in a high-tech industry to found an independent think and do tank focused on AI governance. And some of you may have already heard of it, called the Future Society. He has a master's of public administration from the Harvard Kennedy Center and has taught AI governance at several leading universities, including Sciences Po and the IE School of Global Affairs. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming this morning our exceptional keynote speaker, Nico, to the stage.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to Celine for the great welcoming words. And congratulations to the organizers for putting together such a wonderful conference, an important one. I know it's a lot of work. And thanks for the host in this amazing building, this biotech campus. This very much looks like a cathedral dedicated to science, technology, and its translation into society and in the economy. Before I get going, and I present what I want to present you this morning, which is one of the projects I've been involved in, one of the organizations I'm serving as a volunteer, namely the Global Partnership on AI. I just want to take a step back and talk for a second about my day job. So I lead a nonprofit think and do tank called TFS, and we are really focused on AI policy and governance. It's a small team that I started originally at the Kennedy School of Government back in 2014. And back in these days, when we were talking about governing the rise of AI, people thought we were nuts. And what do you mean governing the rise of AI? Well, now, these days, the picture has changed a little bit. I think that society and our global leaders have understood a bit more why governing the rise of AI is the challenge of a generation, and to some, the challenge, one of the biggest challenge of humanity. Putting together what is required in terms of the cocktails, as smart as they can be, of soft, and indeed, yes, hard regulatory mechanisms and their enforcements via adjudicatory, regulatory, administrative, and algorithmic protocols is something that is extremely important to capture the upsides and minimize the downsides of AI. When we say institutional innovation, and we're trying to go at institutional innovation with a method, so we do research, we do advocacy, and so we work on both sides of the Atlantic. My work and that of my team looks like playing policy ping pong between San Francisco and Brussels via Washington, D.C., Paris, and London. So we try and be a bit organized in how we do things. And we try and address 4 target audiences that have a key role to play in shaping the responsible adoption of AI. Obviously, developers of AI systems, people working in these labs at DeepMind, at OpenAI, at Adept, at Cohere, are a key target for us. Deployers of AI systems, and particularly people in the so-called big tech digital industry, which are there to scale this algorithmic processing up and have them percolating into the economy. The regulators of AI systems, of course, and a community which is not sufficiently talked about, in our opinion, the investors in the field of AI. Like me, you have seen over the past years the immense and growing size of investments being poured into generative AI. I mean, these days, a seed round, when you don't have a product and you want to start a model, you have to raise 100 million. When you want to scale, a model, because of the intensity of compute, talent, and data, you have to put on the table over $1 billion. So people have to put that money on the table. Who these people are, what ethical and governance framework they follow, what soft, and hard governance mechanisms they have to adhere to is critical. With that said, I now want to focus, and it helps you hopefully understand my biases and how I get into my role within Project RAISE. So when the global partnership on AI was started back in 2020 as an international platform that emerged from the G7 to bring together multi-stakeholder practitioners to try and chart a way forward in the responsible adoption of AI, I was appointed by the French government as one of the experts, originally in the data governance working group. There are 4 working groups, but one of my colleague and esteemed colleague, and actually the chair of our multi-stakeholder expert group, will give you more details in terms of the institutional setting of GPAI. I speak only on my behalf, and I speak on the behalf of my project colleagues to present to you this morning Project RAISE. What are we talking about? I'll skip that. Okay. With RAISE, and RAISE stands for Responsible AI Strategy for the Environment. So back in 2021, at the very beginning of 2021, within the Responsible AI Working Group and in a cross-working group collaborative mode, we decided to get together to tackle one of, in our opinion, the most important challenge within the governance of AI, within the responsible adoption of AI, which is to engineer the encounter, the reconciliation, the articulation between 2 massive trends within the 21st century. Number one, the need to transition towards decarbonized economy and economies and societies which are respectful of biodiversity. It's called the ecological transition. And second, obviously the AI transition, the transition towards more powerful, data-intensive, advanced algorithmic processing. The way in which we reconcile and articulate these 2 transitions is going to be crucial. We need to do that in a way that does not sacrifice, but actually uphold the best from our values in terms of liberty, democracy, equality, and that is not easy to do if we collectively recognize that we're confronting now increasingly a climate emergency. You know what that means? I mean, for those of you who have read 1984, you know that the state of emergency has been used in the past to justify many types of abuses. And so as we are failing collectively to address climate action, we're putting ourselves into a situation where we're going to resort to these advanced algorithmic processing to find solutions. And you'll see in a minute that there are amazing solutions that can be hatched out and scaled into our economies. But there is a price to pay for that in terms of respect to privacy, in terms of safety, in terms of control, in terms of democracy, in terms of cybersecurity. So we decided to help society get that transition right. And our humble contribution was to develop and implement a responsible AI adoption strategy for climate action and biodiversity preservation by creating first a foundation with a series of table-setting reports that could pave the way for practical actions. Back in 2020, this intersection between AI and climate was not very well defined, and the ecosystems were not well federated. It's getting better now, and we have tried, and we're still trying to contribute along that pathway. In so doing, it as a second objective, we have been trying, and we are, and that's the reason of my presence this morning, trying to work with other institutional partners, starting with obviously the OECD, to anchor this responsible AI strategy framework within a wider framework. And so we are trying to be every year at the COP. We try to work with many other partners, and we try and federate that ecosystem around that framework. These are some of the collaborations and partners that we have. Obviously, the OECD, because never forget that GPAI Secretariat is hosted at OECD, and the founders of GPAI have tried to put on the table the need to synergize between this organization, GPAI and OECD. We're trying to do that. We're trying to exemplify that. And the discussion we'll have in a minute with Céline will try and show you some of the practical ways we do that. But we also work with UNEP and other key actors, because we are a multi-stakeholder organization. So if we don't extend a hand of collaboration and engagements with civil society, with academia and private sector, it won't work. So we have tried to do that, and we'll continue trying and do that. What do we do in practice, and what are we going to be doing moving forward? So we have, in a way, two tracks. When we speak about the environment, because this is a target that we have, this is the artifact that we're trying to impact. We have tried to break it down into, in a way, two tracks. On the one hand, climate action, starting with decarbonization, and on the other hand, biodiversity preservation. So our journey has started to address these communities in a way separately, and then to try and reconcile them around a consolidated framework. Why the need to address them separately? Because if you look at the way in which people in biodiversity preservation think about the role of climate change within their challenges, you see that they are oftentimes under-discussed and under-addressed tensions. For the people in the field of biodiversity preservation, the climate change is one of the 5 main causes of biodiversity depletion. It's not the only one. And so it appeared to us very important to honor and engage with their underlying risk opportunities framework in a way which was initially separated to then be reconciled. So we started with climate action. In 2021, we published a table setting report on AI and climate action, which I will summarize for you in a minute and try and put on the table a few use cases so that you can hopefully touch with your fingers in a bit more of a practical way what we mean by AI for climate action. So we did that, and we then moved towards trying to implement some of these recommendations, including through a joint report on AI and compute with the OECD, which I think we're going to discuss in the panel afterwards. We also then in 2022 started a similar exercise on the side of biodiversity preservation with this report on AI and biodiversity. Both were presented in their respective COPs, COP27, COP15, to try and engage with stakeholders and governments along those lines. And RAISE also serves as a way as a point of reference, if not expertise, but I want to be very humble vis-a-vis the expertise that the experts bring to the table. We have to work with people like you. We have to work with people who are really working in climate science, because we lack a ton of expertise to really explore and leverage that intersection. However, the project serves as a point of reference for other working groups, innovation and commercialization, future of work, and data governance, providing climate action and environment action use case and focus. For example, we have collaborated with our colleagues on their work on data institutions, looking at whether the emerging concept of data trusts could be a useful concept, for example, to hand over control back to people who are operating at the front line of climate action, or work on, for example, data and AI model licensing, which is a key bottleneck for responsible AI adoption in the field of large models. We are also trying to and working to liaise and create a form of a continuous forum of communication cooperation with what we consider, in a way, or peers in the world of climate and biodiversity. So the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and IPBES, or biodiversity, we're trying to engage with them to have a consolidated approach in terms of what do we mean by responsible AI for the environment. These people, to do climate modeling, biodiversity modeling, leverage very advanced algorithmic processing systems, so-called AI. How can we together chart a course forward? Is something that we have tried to do and we continue to do. So let me maybe be a bit more practical in terms of AI for climate action, what we mean and what lies upon us. So I'll summarize some of the recommendations and some of the use case that we've used to analyze this intersection. So as I said, in 2021, we commissioned that report on climate change and AI. We did that in collaboration with two fantastic organizations, knowledge partners, which provide a lot of the expertise that we lacked. One is Climate Change AI, which is a network of scientists and practitioners operating within that intersection, with many of them, for example, involved within the IPCC. And the other is the Center for AI and Climate in the UK. The goal of such a report was to provide actionable recommendations as to how government can support responsible use of AI in the context of climate change. So in a way, there were three objectives. It show how we can support the applications in climate change, both on the mitigation side and the adaptation side, because there's a treasure trove of use cases that exist, that have to be scaled, provided we find the right ways. A second is acknowledging and showing the way in terms of how we can reduce AI's negative impact on the climate. As of today, there is still no consolidated reporting standards over how AI compute impacts the environment, starting with carbon and CO2 and water. This is starting to change. And as a result of this report, we started working with the OECD on that front. A lot more work is needed on that. There's still claims which are made every day over these training Bloom as a large language model with 176 billion parameters equated for the training stage a CO2 emission equivalent of 50 tons of carbon. Is it part of a standardized reporting framework that is percolating within policy frameworks, including regulatory framework, including, let's say, the way in which government purchase cloud computing reward those who are a bit more frugal? Well, it's not yet the case. There's still a long, long way to go. And that report has tried to help table setting the problematic on that. And we also, with this report, have tried to show and build a framework towards the practitioners, including governments, but not only, in terms of what kind of implementation, evaluation, and governance capabilities are required to adopt AI for climate action responsibly. And so the way in which we have built that framework correspond to, in a way, 9 buckets, or 8 buckets, or actually 8 buckets, but there are a few. Well, we looked at the questions of data and digital infrastructure, which are crucial. We looked at the question of research and innovation funding. We looked at the questions of deployment and system integration. And that was as a way to cover AI as a tool for climate action. We also looked, and introspected and invited communities to introspect in terms of how can we reduce AI negative impact on the climate, and in terms of shaping the way for implementation, evaluation, and governance. We looked at responsible AI, what that means as a framework, capacity building, which is crucial, as you know, international collaboration, and impact assessment. Maybe diving into concretely what AI can do to deliver on climate action. Well, there are 4 key, in a way, functions or 4 key meta opportunities in terms of what climate can bring to the table, or what AI can bring to the table for climate action. First, with these more and more powerful algorithmic processing, including large model, including foundational models, including within their generative AI function, because generative AI is a function of these general purpose AI systems, is a key function, is not the only one. Reasoning, planning are others, but distilling raw data into actionable information is something that where AI can really help, that is needed. Improving prediction and helping, in a way, move from simulation to emulation. We need to simulate a lot more the climate and complex systems. AI can really help there. Optimizing complex systems. I mean, urban systems are extremely complex. Land systems are extremely complex. And on that, AI has and will continue to provide opportunities. And last but not the least, especially here today, accelerating scientific modeling and discovery. And that's a key objective for people developing general purpose AI systems. If you ask Demis Hassabis, the founder of DeepMind, and now the lead of the consolidated entity within Google, which is the result of the merger between Google Brain and DeepMind, what is his yardstick to measure progress towards artificial general intelligence, which is his intention? I mean, it's really the goal of Google DeepMind, the personal goal of Demis Hassabis, as stated by him, to develop artificial general intelligence. If you ask him, what's your yardstick? When will we know? Because there is no consolidated definition of AGI, of course. The way we frame it is the moment really AI can really, and it's already the case, but can really not take over, but take a leading role in accelerating and helping scientific discovery is really something. And that's probably also why, and the reason why he has invested a lot of the resources of his lab in the development of models such as AlphaFold that have really created scientific breakthrough or supported and empowered scientific breakthrough in protein folding modeling. And in the field of climate, of course, this is also something that can be leveraged. Now, when you look at the areas within our societies and our economies where there are important carbon emission and where really AI can help, well, we're talking about electrification, we're talking about heavy industries, we're talking about farming, we're talking about transportation, we're talking about managing forest fires, reducing and estimating and automating afforestation. We're talking about agriculture. So it's really a broad range of sectors that are and will continue to be impacted and can be impacted and should be impacted responsibly. At the very end of that report, one thing that we have tried to do is establish a booklet of 20 use cases that were there to show practitioners engaging with the material practically what we mean by responsible adoption, and particularly AI adoption for climate. So I can cover a few of them to give you an example. Number one, the move towards smart grid. And smart grid meaning here optimized electricity grid in their ability to deal with the electricity load and integrate renewable energies in a way that is both consolidated and efficient. So one of the leading grid provider in Europe, RTE in France, got together with colleagues and other grids in Europe and around the world. I think it also included people in Asia and including China, to create a competition and an iterative competition, providing a sandbox, an innovative platform to validate the potential of reinforcement learning to optimize power grids. And we retain that example because I think it exemplifies the magnitude and the challenges of deploying AI at the core of our critical infrastructure. Would we agree that grid and power grids are among the most critical infrastructure that we have? If we could agree. And therefore deploying systems and algorithms which are not robust. Reinforcement learning, large models are really not robust. I mean, they are not certified. They are black boxes. So creating a pathway to integrate this powerful system at the core of our grids is not going to be easy. And so the method that we pursue to do that is very important to reconcile innovation and safety. And that's something that project looked very interesting. Second example which is quite timely. I mean, I think we can all sympathize with the people of Libya, looking at the floods that are hitting them as we speak. Not to talk about Morocco in the earthquake, but AI has abilities to help through Earth observation, a better mapping of flood areas. That's something that the United Nations Satellite Center has done, and providing a high frequency, low latency flood reports to improve disaster response in different countries. That's something where there is a lot more that can and will be done, but there is also something that exists. Third, and it's also a classic, leveraging reinforcement learning to optimize the consumption of energy to power data centers, something that DeepMind has made a lot of claims in terms of what it can achieve and has accomplished. The figures that we're talking about here and that they were claiming is approximately 30%, 40%. This is huge. I mean, we're talking about people whose job it is to operate data centers, whose job it is to reduce consumption of electricity. But we also have wanted to look at other areas beyond these, because climate action is something that is really trying to optimize the consumption of natural resources across. So there are also very interesting set of opportunities to improve urban design by simulating microclimates at the level of a second instead of hours. So that's something that is modeling and delivering a better urban planning and urban design is crucial. I mean, we are living in this century of urbanization. If you look at the story of the development of India, it's really, in China, it's really the story of a massive migration from countryside to city. The way in which we deliver that is going to be crucial. And AI can also help there. Obviously, monitoring deforestation in large forested areas, including Amazonia, is something that, satellite imagery powered by algorithmic processing can really help. And again, in a way which is higher in resolution and lower in latency. That's something that is crucial. And reducing the footprint of, I would say, carbon-intensive manufacturing processes. Well, steel manufacturing, as you know, is extremely, I would say, energy-intensive. And so reducing the footprint on that is with the same question of modeling, of optimization can help. There are more. I invite you to read the report what we've done with these is list the use case and try and help flag the main challenges and the main bottlenecks to activate them. As I said, our project is anchored in the Responsible AI Working Group. And so this Responsible AI Working Group has a moral obligation and a mission to put at the center of what we do an ethical framework. So also as a foundational element of our work, we have tried to lay the form of groundwork, lay the ground for an ethical framework. And so there are 4 points, I think, which are important to cover. First, we have always said, and we continue to say, that AI is not an end, it's a means, and should be seen as a means and not as an end. Okay, it's, otherwise you fall into the dangers of the hammer and the nail. And so what we have tried to do and what we have tried to inject into all the cooperation we have find ourselves into is we need to be driven by impact planning and assessment and risk assessment to measure the cost benefit of however and whatever AI is used. I mean, can we envision for all of us a personalized CO2 emission account running on our phones in the next 10 years to really help empower us to optimize our CO2 consumption? Is this technologically possible? Yes. Is it desirable? Depends. So considering really AI as a means and not as an end, and considering AI in the intricacies of the underlying techno-scientific cocktail is important. To give you an example, be it Llama 2, be it GPT-4, be it Palm Med 2 in medical services, these large models remain not robust and not explainable. They hallucinate, they deliver great performance, but they remain, in so many ways, research projects. They are not robust. And do we want to deploy them quickly to help power such kind of applications? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the trajectory of robustifying them and rendering, in a way, compatible with what we expect from our core infrastructure, even if they are software infrastructure. Second, we wanted to clearly state that AI can have both positive and negative impacts on climate and the environment. We cannot mobilize communities to try and trigger a wave of AI-powered innovation without recognizing that, well, AI too has problems to solve. I mean, these large models are extremely energy intensive. We don't know, as I said before, exactly how and to which extent. This is one of the things that we need to advance on, establishing authoritative and independent benchmarks of the energy and water consumption and the wider environmental footprint of these systems. But it's important to acknowledge that. And you read the news like we do, you see that there are a lot of claims and people are getting worried in terms of, is it really like a net positive or a net negative? I have my views on that, but they don't really matter. What we need is a evidence-based, science-centric, and inclusive way of answering that question. And third, we cannot overlook AI's relationship with other questions, such as equity, climate justice, and even to a certain extent, questions of sovereignty. But the story of AI so far, in my opinion, has been the story of a centralization of power and wealth in the hands of a few corporations and a limited number of nations. It's because of the underlying scientific, maybe not, but political economy. We're talking about network effects and hyper return to scale. And when I look at the history of digital revolution and AI revolution, I see the story of an amazing vertical integration of the value chains. Companies like Amazon Web Service and Google exemplify that. They run from applications to semiconductors. That's centralization. So how do we balance that with our commitments to self-governance, our commitments to self-determination? And if some in the country I was born and raised, France, consider themselves a digital colony of the US, imagine the perception that can exist in the global South. So we also have to look at that. And we have to look at that because we, as I said, we are going to leverage and hope that climate through synergistic effects triggered by hyper return to scale are going to optimize our systems. And if we want AI compute to consume less carbon, yes, it makes sense to centralize compute. So centralization is also a way through which we can optimize CO2 emission. And therefore, who controls, who owns, who has access to this centralized compute infrastructure, which are more energy efficient, is a question that we cannot overlook. Otherwise, we should not complain. And if 15 years down the line, some people get on the street and start complaining, becoming violent. So I mean, we should complain. It's not acceptable, but we should not be surprised. It's part of our responsibility. And last but not the least, it's crucial to avoid techno-solutionism, greenwashing, and diversion. AI is not a silver bullet. When we hear that AI will solve it all, no way. It's very important to put that on the table and to try and help distill what AI can bring and bring responsibly, and what pertains to societies and individuals in adjusting their behaviors. It's too dangerous to fall, for example, for the dream that large models, general purpose AI systems, will help us solve, from a scientific perspective, from an engineering perspective, the dream of access to nuclear fusion energy. Can it help? Will it help? For sure. Should it bail us out to do the other behavioral adjustment that we need to do? Probably not. So finding the right balance between that as a peer is crucial to us. So that's the core of that, in a way, ethical framework. Maybe diving to close in on some of the recommendations that we've tried to put on the table, and I've highlighted in yellow some of the recommendations that we have started to work on since then. So in terms of data and digital infrastructure, which is crucial, as you know, we had recommended to collaborate with other member countries of GPAI, and now there are 29 countries within GPAI. It started within the G7 of 29 countries. It's amazing. To fund the development of an international catalog of open source climate relevant data, models, and software. We have started to act upon that with UNEP and others on that, and there are many other initiatives appearing there. And remember that we formulated these recommendations not only to be able to work on them ourselves, but also to invite other organizations who have a mandate and a responsibility to act upon them. And there's good progress on that. And then there's also one of the projects that we're trying to pursue at GPAI within the RAISE project looks at that. Well, we also recommended to provide support in terms of cloud compute resources that are affordable for academic researchers, civil society, small and medium enterprise. It's obvious for the reason that I said. Spread compute, spread the scarce resource of AI at the periphery, not only at the center, and provide it to people who are working on the field. Within research and innovation funding, I think we recommended to accommodate AI within wider climate grant challenges. I think that's something which is also picking up. And fund the development of research compute and simulation assets for AI for climate research. I'll come to that in a minute. There are projects appearing on the horizon, trying to act as catalysts, which are interesting, so long as we don't fall into the trap of techno-solutionism. In terms of deployment and system integration, which is key, as you know, to move from research pilot to actually industrial deployment. We thought that, because remember that a lot of these industrial sector, like energy, like heavy industry, they are not necessarily very innovative. And we don't demand from them they are innovative. We demand from them that they are robust and that they have a safety culture. And so we should not be surprised if they are a bit conservative. And so transforming the business of utilities is not something that is going to be easy for good reasons, because they are crucial, they are critical infrastructure. And so reconciling this notion of the safety culture with innovation is something that is not easy, and setting up and co-funding public-private investment groups with regulated industries to co-invest in startup offering digital services is something that would help accelerate the rate of AI-powered innovation within these more traditional sectors. And it's a classic, but it has to be reminded, developing cross-sectoral innovation centers to incubate projects and facilitate collaboration is crucial. As I said at the beginning, 3 years on, we started in 2020, I can still see that the ecosystems, this intersection between AI and climate, they are not consolidated. We're making progress, but they are still fragmented. So having like key project that can serve as a set of rallying points besides pooling resources is important and continues to be important. In terms of reducing AI negative impact on climate, Besides what I said before, which is establishing the standards of reporting of AI compute in a way that we can hold all cloud and all compute provider accountable to their CO2 emission in a standardized way is important. Ensuring that also government procure compute services from companies that have signed up to net zero target, covering scope 1, of course, but also scope 2 and scope 3 is something that is important. It's not easy, but it's not because it's not easy that we should not do anything about that. It's the contrary. In terms of responsible AI implementation and assessment, one thing that we have clearly seen is that for the reason that I said before, AI is a story of concentration of wealth and power. It's very important to empower civil society and academia, which now appear at the periphery of these complex systems. And for example, including participation stipends for experts coming from them within the budget of governmental task force so that they can be meaningfully active within these groups, and shaping this AI for Climate initiative is something that is crucial. Because people at the periphery of these systems, and we'll see that in a minute when I summarize what we have done in biodiversity, people at the periphery of these systems oftentimes are better equipped to understand local situation with high resolution. And so it's important that we keep them not only in the loop, but in control, because in many times they own the rights, they have produced this data. They cannot be excluded from there. It's too easy to depersonalize that and make it sound very material and we're just processing data. No. It shouldn't work like that. Otherwise, again, we should not remember that these systems, these powerful AI systems are black boxes. So the only way so far we can make them robust is by being very precise in terms of controlling the input, these people, and who they are, and understanding where the data is coming from, and the output. And in terms of capacity building is an immense challenge on the front of AI for Climate. Immense challenge. Like we recommended, and there are good progress being made around AI literacy and upskilling for governments and climate relevant industries to federate these ecosystems around common understanding of what AI can do, what it cannot do, and how it can do that. Seconding and funding secondment programs for AI experts within climate relevant sectors to help seed these ecosystems is something that appears to us as crucial. Yeah, progress being made. We need more to be done. Last but not the least, on these two functions, assessing AI's overall impact on the climate. I spoke about that before. Set reporting requirements, very important, along the full life cycle, and methodological standards. And last but not the least, this problem is too small to be addressed by one country, and AI is too big to not be addressed at the global level. And therefore, international cooperation in the way in which GPAI has been trying to advance is crucial. And maybe let me try and project ourselves into the future, into when we look at generative AI, when we look at what generative AI can do, it should do for the planet. There is a dream on the horizon, the dream of a digital twin or a set of digital twins for the planet, which could model and move beyond climate modeling and help model the climate long-term, decades in the future, at a level of resolution which is a kilometer-like and a few hours and a few minutes. It's the dream of weather forecasting in the very long term. When you look at the power of AI and the power of this concept of digital twins, we here are on the cusp of, I think, a revolution for climate modeling that can be captured, and there are already projects that are starting to be put on the table, and I hope that, and we at Project Eyes have looked at these projects, such as Destination Earth, which is a project led by the European Commission with ECMWF, with ESA, trying to set the foundation to build these digital twins in a robust way. And if the ambition is to model the climate at such a resolution, and I mean, of course, the AI systems powering them have to be robust, have to be reliable. Otherwise, I mean, we will run into the wall. And they are. If you look at the ambition of a company which is key in the AI value chain, such as NVIDIA, I mean, they have the ambition to power such kind of digital twins. And so when we project ourselves into the future of what AI can do for climate modeling, moving from simulation to emulation, we have something here that is already put in, for which there is already a foundation that has been laid, and that should attract our attention in both looking at the opportunity and the challenges, what I said before, in terms of this ethical framework, I mean, they will apply that. They will apply very crucially there if we are willing to really look into the future and predict future changes and test how policy intervention might intervene. This is what lies upon us on the horizon. Maybe in closing, I'm looking at the clock. Well, okay. Maybe in closing, I want to introduce a little bit the report that we did in 2022 to do a similar exercise for biodiversity, which is to provide actionable recommendation on the intersection between AI and biodiversity preservation. We try to assess the landscape and understand how AI can be used to better understand biodiversity and biodiversity loss, the drivers of such loss, what type of policy action can be meaningful, and what are the pathways to optimize action on biodiversity. We looked at the risks, of course, the common challenges, and we provided a recommendation roadmap. Maybe a few of the common challenges, and I spoke about that a minute ago. Well, number one, data. Data is collected in some biodiversity hotspots and not others. I mean, do we have good data about the great mammals? Yes, we do. Do we have data about all the other species that we need to oversee? No, we don't. And so there are less charismatic ecosystems that are not as well covered. And for these, we lack the set of data that we deserve. And more probably for biodiversity as for climate, the way in which these data are processed does not necessarily always honor and respect the rights of the communities that produce them. And if we are to continue to map well, we need to work with these communities. You know, there's in the field of biodiversity what we call citizen science, the encounter between science and society to produce good in situ data, which are needed to operate these models, is crucial. And if we do not respect these communities, they won't work the same way. Funding, well, there's not enough funding as always, but also, again, the funding is very centered on some areas and some actors, and not sufficiently. They don't necessarily, this type of funding, follow a sound impact planning and assessment cycle. And obviously, lack of capacity and awareness. And that's why we're trying to help federate the ecosystem of conservation efforts with AI. Well, we provided recommendations along these three pillars: data, funding, and capacity and awareness. Calling for more data, calling for more funding, and both at the application and the digital infrastructure. Same for climate, and really moving towards a capacity building revolution. What is needed for climate is all the more needed for biodiversity. The intersection between AI and biodiversity is probably where the intersection of climate and AI was 3 or 4 years ago. And it's the same. And if you look at the progress of biodiversity preservation versus climate, I mean, look at the results of the COP. It's the same for the encounter between AI and climate. I won't present that report because we are going to discuss that in a minute. But last but not the least, something that we have tried to do is collaborate with our colleagues from the OECD to establish a table-setting effort on what could be the pathway to establishing independent and authoritative benchmarking on the energy and water consumption of compute dedicated to AI. One challenge that I would just flag here is that it's obviously very difficult to segregate at the data center level what is an application that falls under AI and what is an application that falls under something else. It's not easy. I'll stop there. I'll stop there. I think it's enough. I hope it has given you a good overview of what we're trying to do, and hopefully it is meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nico. We have some questions if we want to continue. So I don't want to preempt what the panel at 10:30 is going to get into in much more detail, but just to be democratic, I will take the question with the most votes. It's a bit of a technical question and gets at some of what you presented in terms of the direct indirect impacts of AI. So the question is, when carbon emission costs of AI models are stated, does this include the cost of actually producing all the GPUs and other hardware? So here we're talking about scope 3. It sounds like the answer is no. What is required to get to the point of fully accounting for the CO2 costs of AI developments, not just the electricity cost of running the hardware?
Well, great question. Whoever is asking this question is putting her or his finger exactly where it needs to be put. So as far, to the best of my knowledge, the answer is obviously no. And I really invite you, as an example, to read the article that was published recently and co-authored by Sasha Lucioni and two other co-authors from Hugging Face, where she took the example of one large models, Project Bloom, co-developed in France by CNRS, Hugging Face, and Enria, and other actors. That is a model of 180 billion parameters, so the equivalent in terms of size of GPT-3. And she's tried to understand the carbon emission involved in the training and at the inference stage when you deploy the model. But she's not even been able to look beyond that and address the questions pertaining to scope 2 and scope 3 and even at the cost of CO2, even in the context of CO2 emission, not even talking about the rest. CO2 emission is one thing, but there are other things. So the answer is no. And what we need is, that's why I'm flashing that slide from the report that Céline and Johannes worked together a few years ago, is because we need common frameworks to measure direct positive and negative impacts and indirect positive and negative impacts along the full life cycle and value chain, from production, transportation, operations, and end of life. We are not at that stage. We need to move towards a better evidence base. We don't yet have the evidence to then be able to frame normative commitments, standards, and then, in my opinion, baked this standard into required legislation. Maybe one step going in that direction. For those of you who are aware of the forthcoming EU AI Act, which is the so far only legally binding regime that we're seeing in the West, because China has also acted on that, but in the West, there are legally binding regime appearing on the horizon, and the one that exists is this EU AI Act. In the compromise text voted by the European Parliament a few months ago, that is being right now negotiated within the trilogue with the other co-legislator, the Council and the Commission, the Green Party, this text, this compromise text, resulted in, in my opinion, very interesting political deal between the right, the left, and the Greens. Within that, there is a governance regime for foundation models, and within that, there are, I would say, common sense, lightweight obligations being put on the developers to be more transparent and to do more effort to better assess the environmental impact, particularly the CO2 emission impact of their models. It is going in that direction, but there is so much more work that needs to be done, and the work that the OECD's AI compute and climate task force is doing, I think, has to be recognized and invited to go deeper. That's one area I would really ask you to focus, read their reports, and make your suggestion there. That's a great question.
Great, thank you. We have another question from our audience. So do you also recommend or advise what kind of AI system or model should or should not be used for different purposes? I think what this question is getting at is your point around techno-solutionism. We're in a world now where, when you go to buy a washing machine or a fridge, it seems that there's AI in it. Is AI a silver bullet solution for climate, or should we be thinking about it a bit more critically?
No, we should absolutely be thinking about it in a very critical way, looking at, as I said, the underlying techno-scientific cocktail. Are linear regressions still useful? Yes, they are. When we need to have and we want to have a deeper understanding of the phenomena we're trying to model, such tools, which are not necessarily very powerful and very automatized, yes, they're absolutely useful. I mean, when we're trying as a community to follow the scientific method, we need to calibrate the tool we use to the expectations we have in terms of the robustness of our systems. Because these large general purpose systems, they are not causative in nature, they are correlative in nature. We cannot understand the way in which they work. Are they useful to as part of an investigation? Of course they are. Should we rely on them in a blind way? Certainly not. And that's why, to give you an example, we have been struggling as a society to deploy the systems at the core of our automotive industry to trigger this revolution in AVs, in autonomous vehicles, because they are not robust. So what we have done is, if you go to San Francisco, you'll see a lot now of autonomous vessels without drivers clocking kilometers into the city, clocking kilometers, clocking billions of kilometers. Why? Well, because since we cannot understand the way in which the systems operate, what society has tried to do to honor our commitment to safety, because these vehicles are moving a lot of kinetic energy, they can do a lot of damage. I mean, so the device that we have, in a way, the responsible adoption mechanism that has been put on the table is the equivalent in the age of vehicle engineering of a clinical trial. We are running clinical trials. And so, like with clinical trials, we establish cohorts that last years and that are exposed to several types of people to measure the impact and also measure the safety incidents and other things. We're trying to do something with cars. I think this is the kind of adaptation that we require given the underlying techno-scientific cocktails. But again, there's many other systems beyond this general purpose AI system. It's just that they are general purpose in nature and they are powerful. It's not only that they've captured the imagination. I mean, try them yourselves. Download these systems, because many of them are open source. And I think the open source question is problematic, but we could discuss that. Download them yourself. You see how powerful they are. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Nico. Maybe one question to conclude, just your concluding thoughts. You know, you have been running a civil society organization in a prominent one in AI governance for nearly a decade. There is just so much going on when it comes to AI in the news. Just when we look at government policies in AI, you know, in 2017, there was only a handful. Today on our OECD AI Observatory, we log over 800 AI policy related documents. There's just so much going on in AI governance. What advice would you give people looking to start in civil society, working in AI governance or academia today to really, you know, get their voice and message across?
Well, it's very important that you seek to develop a minimum set of expertise and understanding of the underlying techno-scientific cocktails, of the underlying political economy, the underlying geostrategic context. I mean, most of these GPUs are actually manufactured in Taiwan. This has consequences. This will have consequences. I mean, the mounting tensions between China and the US, this will have consequences. So trying to have an understanding of that, an understanding of how these, I would say, underlying paradigms affect the communities you're trying to serve is very important. And then try and add value. One other thing that is very important is duplication will not necessarily help. Try and add value, try and join coalitions. And what is the one way to look at duplication versus addition? And if you have a different interest or diverging opinion, yes, of course, duplicate, because then you are into a conversation, into a potentially conflict, which is a form of conversation. It's not bad. Do that. If you feel that what your study has led you to is demanding that you create something else, but then if you do that, engage in that conversation and engage in that conversation constructively, not only trying to put the other one down. We have no time to waste. The systems are progressing at lightning speed, and our institutions are not yet ready to govern them. So let's try and be constructive.
That's a great point, I think, to end on. Well, thank you so much, Nico, for a really great keynote this morning. I think now we'll go to a coffee break just outside the auditorium, and we'll be back at 10:30. Oh, okay, I'm saying the things that you're going to say. There you go. Thank you again, Nico.